Good evening. Do we want to just do the approval of the minutes first? Approval of the minutes?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Okay, minutes have been approved and seconded. We're going to start this morning. I apologize. We're going to start this meeting with public participation. We're just going to ask that the speakers, that when you come to the podium, the speaker states the name and address and city and the municipality in which they reside. Limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. Address the board directly with your comments, and comments will be taken into consideration. All right? And we're going to open it up for public participation right off the bat.
Hi, my name is Nick Spitel. I live at 124 Wooded Lane, Villanova, Pennsylvania, and I'm here about the dog situation. My first question is, last year when I was here for the dogs with off-leash at Skunk Hollow, we didn't get a lot of data. My question is, and we were assured that this is going to be this is just one little move, only on Saturdays and Sundays, but it seems like it's an ongoing issue. And I don't know who's driving this issue or where this data of all the incidents are coming from, but I just want to make a few points. Many people have multiple dogs or energetic dogs, and in fact, they can't walk their dogs on a leash. Dogs need exercise. Dogs get bored. Walking them up and down my street is not stimulating to dogs, so taking them to different places. Leash-related aggression is a known issue. It's true. My dog, if a stranger approaches him when he's on the leash, he'll bark at them. Off the leash, he does nothing. He actually ignores people. There are plenty of other parks and places for people actually to take their dogs. If you look at the Willows, the majority of the property between Skunk Hollow and the Willows, dogs aren't allowed at all. But now that's limited. Now you're looking to limit dogs in other parks. The recent, there's been a lot of community effort and a lot of people here passionate about being able to take their dogs to different parks. I heard someone mention Hartford Park. If that's the last refuge of dogs, that's a terrible place. You might as well just build me a track. Andy, you look confused. Do you have a question?
I'm just trying to follow your logic. So
Well, then ask me a question then.
I don't have any question. I'm just trying to follow your logic.
Well, my logic is, where did the anti-dog movement come from?
I don't know of any anti-dog movement.
Well, why is there constant restrictions on dogs?
It's not constant restriction on dogs.
Well, then what's the point of this meeting tonight?
There's no more restrictions on the Skunk Hollow leash restrictions. This is simply to address a clarification of what parks are already restricted for dogs and which ones are not. There's not a single minute that's being taken off the Skunk Hollow.
I'm also concerned about other restrictions at other parks.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just having trouble following your logic, so I'm trying to pay attention.
Okay, so my logic is, Andy, then what is your problem with dogs? Do you have a problem with
I
dogs?
don't have any problem with dogs.
Because you seem like combative with me.
I'm not being combative. You were the one who asked me a question. I was just having trouble following.
Okay,
Excuse
so-
me, could we just stick with the comments?
Okay, so
Just
my
addressing
comments
the board.
are that I don't understand why you want to keep restricting dogs. People are very passionate about the dogs. It provides exercise for people and dogs, and I think they can coexist. That's the bottom line. I don't know why there's such a movement to restrict dogs.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hi there. My name is Sandhya Nayak. I live at 227 Poplar Avenue in North Wayne. My husband, Kaveh Tagavi, and I are the owners of 3 dogs. Snoopy, Sammy, and Rocket are 12, 8, and 3 years old, ranging from 30 to 80 pounds. My husband grew up with dogs. I didn't. We've owned them together only for the last decade. We disagree with the draft recommendation. I feel it is at odds with your intent. Let me explain. In one sense, we have no skin in the game. We leash our dogs when we walk them, and we're fortunate to have a sizable yard for their off-leash time. Yet we strongly disagree with your draft because we feel it's at odds with the needs of this community and a major disconnect with what we've heard of the problems articulated so far. We believe in community, and based on the energy and time you've committed, you volunteer. We know that you do too. And among other things, community to us means cooperation and personal responsibility and a culture of compliance. So whether that's holding the door for the person behind you, or picking up your trash or your dog's poop, or abiding by 25-mile-per-hour speed limits, or stopping fully at the stop sign. You know, to live successfully in society, you need a culture of compliance. You know, we get bothered by people running through the stop sign right at the park. So we've watched the Parks and Rec board meetings of November and December. I've spoken with friends who are regulars at Skunk Hollow off-leash. We've seen, you know, people off-leash at North Wayne Park. I've spoken with friends whose dog was attacked by an off-leash dog, and they had to take their dog to the vet. It seems there are like these issues of dogs in dog-prohibited parks, whether at Clem Macron or dogs being brought to athletic games. And I hear the police only enforce no dogs at prohibited parks if there's a complaint. And frankly, that's mind-boggling because it doesn't give families who have whatever animal phobia or whatever, it doesn't give them a safe space. You know, it's like if you have to complain to be at a park without a dog, that's, anyway. And I'm frankly surprised that our athletic commissioners for soccer or baseball haven't spoken up about dogs at athletic games. It's like, that whole bit didn't make sense to me. Anyway, that isn't a culture of compliance and cooperation. And so I hear Tammy and you all saying you're looking to make the municipal code more specific to help the police and others in enforcement. And so you're looking to better articulate what control means and to specify in the code which parks allow dogs. But this draft is a massive pendulum swing, and it so narrowly defines control using only leash and putting all these neighborhood walkable parks into this leash-only category. And I think there's an alternate way to specify control without leash. And Ian, if you could put the overhead on this and blow it up in any way? Ooh.
Sonia, I believe you shared this with Bill, right?
Yeah, I tweaked it a little bit. So for category 1A with the leash only, because the Radnor Trail has bikes, and that's really the only, you know, as far as bikes have no place else to go. So I put that in leash only. But all these other parks, which are, you know, besides Hartford and the Friends of Radnor Trail, like North Wayne, Tennell Park, Veterans Park, I put them in this category of, you know, you can leash the dog. We take our dogs through North Wayne leashed, but we also see other people without leash, and here's the alternate definition. So off-leash parameters, visual sight, that's The owner maintains visual sight of the dog. Maintain control. Owner is able to get an immediate desired response from dog via voice command, whistles, or e-collar. When dog is called, dog shall immediately come, stay by side of their owner, approach only with permission. So you're not having the dogs run around and approach, you. They shouldn't be doing that. There's a little sign that actually Skunk Hollow Friends of Off Leash showed me. Dogs off leash will only approach other persons or dogs if other person verbally permits. And that's what my husband has seen. Two families who knew each other, their dogs were together. And dogs will not go chase after or harass wildlife. So, because I think your current draft has the second whereas, and you refer to negative behaviors. Has there been data at North Wayne or Emlyn Tunnel or Veterans? The fourth whereas, you talk about consistency with surrounding municipalities. Radnor needs to do what's right for Radnor. And when you look at the current code of the surrounding 7 municipalities, each is different. Upper Merion revised their code in 2022 to remove Article 5, and so currently their code simply reads, under reasonable control when engaged in walking, running, exhibition, blah, blah, and other lawful activity. Only Haverford makes reference to leash length. 2 townships have off-leash permitting.
Excuse me, I don't mean to be rude. I truly don't.
I realize, I just think that the last thing I want to say is you've also left an opening in your section E. Your wording refers to emotional support dogs. That is not, only certain animals qualify as service animals under Title II and III of the American Disabilities Act. And maybe that's part of our compliance problem. A lot of animals provide comfort and support, but only very few get the service animal category under ADA. So anyway, what I suggest you do is consider this alternate definition and not put more restrictions and take away community resource. And also, I think the BOC should authorize a subcommittee to really follow this, because whether it's fears or whether it's monitoring and study, I think this really pulls deep at people's heartstrings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Now,
My name is Claudia Dugan. I live at 810 Maple Glen Lane in Radnor. I have a little 12-year-old Pomeranian, and we don't have sidewalks where I live, and our street butts up onto Maplewood, which also doesn't have a sidewalk. And there's really nowhere I can safely walk her. And Ditmer is right next to our street. So I was wondering if you would consider allowing dogs on leash to walk Ditmer on the trail that's already there, and pick up after them, and then we'd be safe. So that's my request.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Curley. I live at 264 Willow Avenue. I'm just coming up to speed a little bit, so forgive me if I'm not totally on top of what's going on, but I was hearing a lot of information from neighbors, what have you, that there are more restrictions that are being proposed to various parks in the area. And I find it really concerning because I think we need to share the parks, and we live across the street from a park, and that park is used 10% of the time, and 90% of the time, it's not being used at all.
May I ask which park?
Cowan.
Cowan.
And so I feel, and Cowan says no dogs in the park at all. And the park's not used at all. It seems kind of crazy. not to share the park in some way, shape, or form. Now, the township as a whole said, well, you can't use Cowan, but you can go to North Wayne Field. Now I'm hearing that there's a proposal that you can't even leave your dog off leash in North Wayne Field. And I totally get it. If you have an aggressive dog that's growling or scaring someone, you know, in an obscene way, that needs to be cracked down on. That's wrong. It's not respectful. I know when we take our dogs in the parks, we always ask, is it okay if they're here? We don't take the dogs in the park if there is someone in the park. We pick up after our dogs. There's decency, you know, there's just human decency that you just take care of your dogs. I have a small dog. Both of our dogs are under 40 pounds, and we actually don't like going to the Willows because there are a lot of big dogs that are racing around and, pardon me? Skunk Hollow. Oh, sorry, you know what I mean. So we don't really like taking them there because it's just a little overwhelming for them. And there isn't anywhere. None of the parks really are amenable to that. There's Hartford, but there are a lot of big dogs there too. So there's just not, I have a small dog that loves to play ball. And she's a Cavalier King Charles. She's the sweetest thing on earth. She, you know, couldn't rattle anybody's. But I feel like slowly but surely she's just not welcome anywhere. And that just doesn't seem right, especially when we have these parks that are so underused. And so my proposal is maybe there's a way to look at the hours, you know, early in the morning or later in the evening. When there's a game, maybe, you know, when there's organized sports, maybe dogs at least have to be on a leash. But, you know, during the school year and during the school day, no one's there. No one's there. There's a great group of young boys. They're about 10 to 12, and they're the only ones who really, there are some guys playing basketball. They couldn't care less about the dogs. And then there's a group of young boys that are 10 to 12 years old, and they're adorable. They love the park, they enjoy the park, and they love nothing more than to play with our dogs in the park. When we bring the Chuckets, they couldn't be happier to, can we do it? Can we use the Chucket? Can we? So I just feel like, I know some people have gotten scared and intimidated by some unruly dogs, but I feel like we're going too far here. We need to find a balance where we all can enjoy the parks together, because we all live here together, and it shouldn't be like only non-dog lovers can use the park. We should all be able to use the park in some way, shape, or form. So my proposal is just, and I'm not giving you any specifics, but there have to be ways that we can live in together. Maybe it's hours. Maybe it's defining, I think, Sandhya's idea of defining what control is. I know the state law is really, your dog just has to be under control. And I agree, you can't have some crazy, unruly dog. So I see you about to touch a button. Are you trying to?
No.
So that's my 2 cents. I thought we were working towards making dogs more welcome in the parks, and then I've now recently learned that it's been actually the exact opposite, that the dogs now are being more and more discouraged from using the parks. And you know, I don't want to intimidate young kids, and I know some young people have, you know, dog fears, but I think the way to solve that is to introduce them to well-behaved dogs and get them over their fears, instead of creating a segregated society where we have dogs and no dogs and there's no interaction. So that's my 2 cents, and I hope you'll consider some of those thoughts.
Thank you.
Tammy, if I could ask in the meantime, the map of the parks, do you have that we can leave up? The green and the, thank you.
Hi, my name's Tim Sass. I live at 274 Berwyn Road. I have a dog, and I think part of the problem is people think their dogs are people, and dogs are not people. They're pack animals, especially when you get 2 or 3. I mean, I love my dog. I always keep him on a leash. You got to keep him controlled. Who knows what he's going to do? He's not a person. The state law, state law is pretty clear that dogs have to be on a leash. I think Radnor's kind of deviating from the state law here, where, what are we going to do? Just isolate it for certain days where you can just run, loose with the dog. The other thing is the enforcement. So, okay, now you have dogs running loose. I mean, I love my dog, but you got dogs running loose. Is this a dog with somebody? How do you determine he can will listen to the commands from his owner. Is this just a wild dog? I've gone to third world countries where people have been bitten by rabid dogs, and they're telling me like, well, what happens when you have dogs running around? Well, we don't have that. We pick them up and, sequester them. I mean, they're animals. And then the other part of it's like the emotional support animals. There's no government agency. There's no way to determine, hey, I got an emotional support animal. There's no test for that. There's some service animal regulations in the ADA, but there's a rigorous test for those sort of things. The other thing is like when you let the dogs run wild, there's other things out there. I mean, other people, I have a dog, I love my dog, but I've had 2 or 3 dogs run up to my dog, and I don't know what's going on. And I'm not a small person, and I'm fearful, like, what, am I gonna have to fight these other 3 dogs with my dog? You don't know, maybe he's well behaved, maybe he's not, but how do you determine that? The way to determine it is to keep them on a leash, have a way that they can control it, that hey, they can only go 6 feet. If I stay 6 feet away, when I've walked through these parks, I've had to walk, yards and yards out of my way to avoid other dogs that aren't on a leash, because my dog's on a leash and I don't want to have him fighting and I'm restraining him, and these other animals are totally unrestrained on that. The other thing is the other wild animals. So we've got dogs, we pamper our dogs, they're fed, they're kept in a warm environment. We let them loose in this park, and there's these animals living wild out there, juncos and foxes and deer, and they're just going to go after their pack animals too. If they get 2 or 3 of them, everybody, maybe they got well-behaved animals, they would be totally fine, but that's never going to happen. And then the other half is the enforcement. Like, okay, I got a loose animal. Is this somebody's dog, or is this just a wild dog? And there's rabies also, that dogs have contracted rabies in the parks from other animals. So now do I have a rabid dog? We'll have a huge liability problem with the township if they allow these sort of things to transpire. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kim Cruz. I live at 70 Garrett Avenue in Radnor Township. Tammy said she forwarded my email to Clark and Howard, to the rest of you, so I'm just going to be up here to reiterate what I said before. I live directly across the street from Tennell Park. Over 20 years ago, my husband was there, and 20 years ago was before the Walker property was purchased by the township. So he was walking our dog off leash in the park, and a police officer stopped him. Neither one of them knew what the law was. My husband got a fine. He paid it, and then we got together with a group of residents in the area, and we came to these meetings, we came to the BOC meetings, we fought for and we won the right to have our dogs off leash at Tennell Park. So what I'm asking is that in this new resolution, you move Tennell over to the dogs with off leash. Dogs are allowed off leash category. I have asked Tammy, I asked Tammy before one time to put up or how we got another one of the dog pooper bags signs up there, and she very kindly said we have them, and she put another one up there. So, we do remind people that they need to clean up after their dogs. Like the lady said, Emlyn Tennell, if it weren't for the community in there, that park would not be used 90% of the time. We have a lot of friends now who have dogs, and we go there and we socialize together in that park. And so, it is a community resource. It is a very beloved community resource, and we'd like to see it stay a community resource where we can take our dogs off leash. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, John Engelhard, 70 Garrett Avenue in Radnor Township. I sent you guys an email as well, but just real quickly reiterate a couple words I heard those. The word reasonable can be a great word, but right now it says dog needs to be under control. The only issues that I've had ever with any dogs have been dogs that are barely under control and they're on a leash because they're aggressive dogs. So the issue really isn't a leash issue, it's an aggressive dog issue. And there are people who buy dogs and own dogs specifically because they want an aggressive dog and they think it, I don't know why, whatever. Why they do that, I don't know, but they do. And I guess what to me is an important thing, so we've been there 29 years and a half. Never seen, there's never been a dog fight. I've never seen anybody attacked by a dog. I've never been harassed or attacked by a dog in that park. And I think it's a typical day in that park is early morning. There's people out walking, running, doing, yoga or things like that, with or without dogs. Some people with leashes, some people without. People say, oh, you're so lucky, your dog is so well behaved. And I say, that's about 700 hours of luck, because that's how much I've put into training my dog to be in control. And often more in control off leash than many others are on leash. So, I'm out working during the day, so I don't know all what goes on, but then in the evenings, we're back out with the dogs again. Same thing, people with dogs, people without dogs, old people, young people, everything in between. There just aren't any issues. People need to be courteous, again, reasonable. If I see someone with a dog on or off leash, I say, hey, is your dog friendly? Yes. All right. Can they approach? Yes. I mean, it's just people can just communicate and self-govern and be respectful. I don't think there's a need to mandate, which is something that you can't really mandate control anyway. I did say in my email, the only incident I am aware of, I wasn't there, but my neighbor's dog who was on leash was attacked by another dog on leash and torn up pretty well during a softball game. And it was a softball parent. The dog was leashed. I think it might have been a retractable leash or something. Somehow it got far enough from the bleachers to where the track is, got a hold of my neighbor's dog, and it was not a good scene from what I hear. So again, it's like, what is the real effectiveness of a leash? It's more about control, and it's about people being smart, using good judgment, and being courteous. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others at this time? Okay. Where do we go from here? So I think, are we gonna do anything with this, or? Anyone from the board?
I'd like to add something. My family and I live in walking distance to Skunk Hollow, and when we moved in, we were very excited. We have a dog, so we thought that we'd be able to take him there with our kids. But the first time that we visited and all subsequent times that we were there, dogs would run up to my kids. One time a dog jumped on my kid, but they would run up so close to my kids without us being able to see the owner that it was incredibly frightening for my kids. Sometimes my kids would be in the creek playing, and the dogs would come in the creek right up to them. And again, we wouldn't be able to see the owner. Once the owners would come, we would always hear the same thing, that the dog was friendly. But to a 3, a 4, or 5-year-old, it's still pretty scary having a strange dog run up to you. And as a parent, it is terrifying seeing a dog that you don't know run up to your kid. Like I said, we're a dog family, but unfortunately my family and I do not go to that park anymore.
The only comment I have is we should certainly consider the last batch of input we had, and I think in the next meeting we should be moving either forward or not with some recommendation to our Board of Commissioners. This is the first quarter of 2020 we first dealt with this issue. One, to deal with the Willows / Skunk Hollow. I think we've taken action or by recommendation. The board has done what it's done with that. The second thing was whether or not we needed or wanted to recommend a change to our general dog law. And we do have a proposal that's floating. I think the next meeting, we should get to a point where we're either not making a recommendation or we are, and then move on from this and let the Board of Commissioners do what they wish with our recommendation to act or not act. But I think it's time to move forward and push this to the next level.
I mean, excuse me, I don't really have much to add other than, the board, I think it was in the October meeting, discussed the idea of a leash and a change to the overall code, and asked Bill and I to be sort of scriveners on this just simply because we're attorneys with that kind of a background. I don't have a background in canine law, and we just sort of put pen to paper. This proposal was reviewed by members of the board shortly after its drafting. It was edited with feedback from Tammy, in particular, her desire to have what is already on the Radnor Township website is what category these parks are in a centralized place. There's no desire to limit the use of dogs. Or animus towards dogs or dog owners. I think that at that same October meeting, I even suggested that we make all parks open to dogs and just have them all be required to be on leash, just simply because enforcement's not going to be there. And the reality is that, just making it clear that dog owners can go to every park, they just have to be on a leash. It opens them up. That was just a suggestion. Response was this, no, I think, why don't we look at the parks that are in the certain categories and sort of codify it, what's already out there. How the board wants to proceed with this is, up to the board. This isn't meant to change or restrict in any way, just to make things a little bit more clear, in hopes that the clarity will provide less of the complaints that we have had. I think the suggestions that were made in terms of tiered control, I think in a perfect world, they would be really good. I do have concerns that when you have certain tiers like that, it adds vagueness that can then lead to potential conflict between dog owners and non-dog owners. That's my concern. Like I thought, and I'm sorry, I forget your name again, ma'am. Sonia. I thought we received your email. I read it. I thought that's a very reasonable thing, and I think in a perfect world would be something that would be good. I just think that one of the issues we have right now, and the needle we've been trying to thread, I can see from the opinions, there's different opinions whether this does it or not. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. But the effort was to try to make it more clear, just simply so there was less vagueness and less conflicts that came out of that. That's what our attempt was. So, with that, whether the board wishes to move forward with this recommendation, no recommendation.
The tiers already.
I
Have Harper and Friends of Radnor Trail.
I think, but I'm talking about within distance, shouting distance, those types of things. We're able to come back and sit by you. I think those would be perfect in if they could. I just don't think that, I think exceptions to that to sort of would eat up any potential rule. That's my concern. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. So, I think they're very reasonable recommendations that you made. I just don't think they're able to be implemented. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe the rest of the board disagrees with me, but that's my concern, that when there's that vagueness, it would lead to potentially more complaints, and what we're trying to do is thread that needle to avoid that.
But
So,
do you have any complaints about these neighborhood parks like Tennelle or North Wayne or?
we receive complaints. I can't sit here and point. We get emails forwarded from Tammy. Tammy does a very professional job responding to a lot of emails about this stuff. Look, I can tell you this. We would not have, as what'd you say, since first quarter of 2020, this would not have been on here. This was on here. This issue is arising and percolating right when I ended my first time on the board back, I think, in 2018. And then I came back and it was still going here. Obviously, it wouldn't be here if there wasn't a concern that the board felt, based on the feedback we're getting from the community, it needed to be addressed.
So here's the thing, you still have an issue of no definition of control for off-leash. Like, So, for example, for Skunk Hollow,
Excuse me, Ms. Tucker,
Could
can you
yeah,
come up to the microphone just so
yeah.
it gets added to the video? I'm speaking to the microphone.
Sanjay, too, respectfully, if we could just have our time to discuss this, and we may open this up to a little bit more comment either. I have some comments as well. I realize I want to respect your time, but we just need our time to talk as well. I just wanted Andy to be able to finish, and then
Okay.
we can have some comments after.
okay.
Just if we can let him finish, let me have some time, and we can open up for final comments.
I mean, no, I have no other comments. I mean, in response to the last two meetings, I've been to Skunk Hollow twice in the last month, one during off-leash hours and one during on-leash hours, just to sort of get a sense as to what's going on. I hadn't been there in a couple months. I do believe that those current parameters were working based on what I saw. Now, I wasn't surprised to see when I was there during leash hours that, 3 of the 5 dogs I ran into were off of leash. That's just the reality of it, and maybe why we, a consideration of just making all the parks dog accessible, since the enforcement is really not practical, in my opinion, is what maybe the recommendation should be. But like I said, this draft resolution was drafted solely, reviewed, and done at the direction of the board. If the board doesn't want to go forward with it, that's perfectly its prerogative. So, thanks.
I do have a qualifying question, and this goes to Tammy. Tammy, are there any playgrounds in the dog-permitted parks currently? Or on the list? I believe no.
Petrie, it would be one.
Petrie would be the one. Okay.
And North Wayne Park.
I wanted to take my time just to address some of the people here tonight, and I appreciate you being here tonight and respectful comments and some of the directions. And we've had some very constructive emails from constituents from the wards that are affected by these parks. I think we're coming to this board as advocates for the community, advocates for the parks. And to speak to the first gentleman's comments, I think the general tenor of the board is not an anti-dog sentiment. I love dogs. I have family members that have dogs. I used to have a dog, and I can appreciate the love that you have for taking your pet in the outdoors. But again, respectively, there are stories that are ongoing, and Tammy does have records of the police reports, the individual incidents of people that either have had harm or perceived harm. So we're trying to, as you commented, trying to have that balance in the community to make sure that people can go to their parks and not be afraid to take their children to a park. At the same time, letting you have your access to your dogs who love like Emily and Tennell, for example. This, unfortunately, has evolved over the years. These rules have come into place with community conversations over 20, 30 years. Other communities have developed policies that were basically leash laws from the beginning. So if we look to Philadelphia, we look at surrounding communities, the state, the rules are clear to allow park rangers, police to enforce the law. But we've grown to have these parks that people can walk their dogs freely or have their dogs off leash. We haven't had the situation in some of the pocket parks like Emily and Tennell of reports of significant harms. There have been, but not significant. I think when we've been trying to address this, we try to standardize this so when you go from one township to another, when we have visitors here, they can know without having looked at a sign they're under the same rules. So that's why the whole no leash concept came into place, because there were exhaustive studies before looking to see how the other townships were dealing with this. And leash laws were in effect with most of the parks, with exceptions to have off-leash parks. We've had those parks, and I know the comments are some of those parks are not ideal, but Skunk Hollow is a giant park in terms of where dogs can be off-leash. Granted, it has ongoing issues, but it's an off-leash park. We also have Hartford Park and the Friends of Radnor Trail Park, which are off-leash. When we put this out, looking to communities, there was assumption the leash law was something to be floated to see if these other parks would be in place. Frankly, there's been enough response for me looking at this. I look at parks like Emily and Tennell and West Wayne, where people go to walk their dogs, is where the communities seem to have control, where it's not that much of an issue. I would ask the board on the current recommendations we had to look at this from a different perspective, and hopefully you can hear me. Looking to, as Sanjay has suggested, the TAP Trail and the Radnor Trail being high-capacity trails where we have bicycles and really where dogs are often challenged walking against each other are the places that we probably need the leash law most in place. We do, as I understand, Tammy, you've told me that we have a general policy and the Radnor Trail that dogs are to be on leash. There are occasional people who do not use leashes, but I think that's something I would recommend we codify the Radnor Trail in particular, and the TAP Trail by that extension. However, listening to community input, I've had a change of heart in terms of these pocket parks and the green listed parks below, to again perpetuate that policy of off-leash in those parks, with the exceptions that were described in the parking lots, for example, where there's public areas. There are public sidewalks that go through parks. There are community access to those areas. Those, I think the expectations are leash would be appropriate in that area. I would extend this, and I haven't extended this before, as a concern about fields and playing fields. I think that during periods of play in fields, for example, Emlyn Tunnel, I think respectfully that would be a time where dogs should be leashed. And I would think a community wouldn't object to those rules. I think that's where you have visitors and you just don't know who those dogs are, for which I think, I don't know how we can word this into the language of this draft, but looking to those parks, for example, that are in the green that do have fields, playing fields. And as a general rule, dogs should be leashed when there's play in fields. Likewise, any parks, and that would be Petrie Park, playgrounds as well. I think that's another area, particularly with children and whatnot. For parents, you want a protection of your child in those environments. So again, if we could put that into the language of this. But I would ask the board to consider, I know that there was good work to do with this, but essentially moving, and I don't know if the resolution is up there, all the parks that were listed in A, with the exception of the TAP Trail and the Radnor Trail, the language being leash law would be reflective of the Radnor TAP Trail and the Radnor Trail, given the obvious concerns. But moving Emlyn Tunnel, Ithan Park, North Wayne Park, Petrie Park, Radnor Nature Park, Sawmill Park, Unkefer Park, and Veterans to the category of B, with the understanding that it would apply to parking lots, public spaces that include sidewalks that would normally be under the leash law of the township, and then modifying it to limit leash periods during times of use of the fields, as well as playground areas. In doing so, we would also keep the status quo of the other parks that were currently listed as dogs prohibited. With note, we've had a request to open the leash law or allow dogs to Ditmar. That was a request from one of our commissioners, and that would be a separate vote in terms of whether that would be included or not. Now, I know this is a change from where we're at before, but I'm making this proposal just based on the community interest that's been put forth, and recognizing that Skunk Hollow is a separate concern. It's something that, again, I think the tenor of the board has always been to try to work with the community to allow an off-leash policy in Skunk Hollow, but at the same time recognizing there's still ongoing issues there, and we're going to address that in a future meeting, again, with try to find solutions and not to be anti-dog, just to find, so we can coexist there better, but just to separate that issue from this meeting. So I know that's a lot to put out there. It's for my board members to digest as well, but I would personally not support the resolution in its current form, and I would just recommend a consideration for that modification. It's significant, moving those down, but again, making Radnor Trail and the TAP Trail being the priority for leash, with the other parks being recognized that they have off-leash with some limitations based on using fields, and that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I just want to say, I'm not a dog owner. I'm not saying that I hate dogs. I am in no way saying that, okay? But for me, it's a different area to look into. We're trying to accommodate, make the township dog friendly. But for me, it's I'm trying my best to be considerate of the dog owners and those that don't have pets, and those that visit the parks and don't have parks. For me, it's like, just to put this out there, I'm sorry. The example of I love basketball. If I could play at night, I would love to have lights on in the township somewhere where we could play basketball. But I know that would be something that the township would have a hard time with, and neighbors would. So I understand, and there's things that you just can't do here. For instance, Ardmore does have basketball lights out there, well, lights, on the basketball court. So for me, I'm looking at it as, okay, you've got playing fields, and your kids, the kids are out there playing in the field, but at the same time, during the off season, if you let your dog run wild during the off season, while the kids aren't out there, you still have the defecation that's on the field. So you have to, but not everybody does that though. But I'm just saying me. Just give me me. I'm just giving you my perspective. That's all. I'm saying that for me, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the fact that we could be in a park and some kid rides past on a bike, and all of a sudden the dog wants to chase the bike. Those are the things that I'm looking at from my perspective. Okay, I'm not saying it's perfect, but those are the things that I'm looking at, and I'm trying my best to be accommodating to those dog owners. So I'm looking at the leash laws and all of that while I'm looking at this. So I'm just trying to reiterate the fact that we are struggling here in how to put this together, and there have been comments made that, oh, you guys are joking around too much on the board and this, that, and the other. But it's hard. It's hard. And I understand your passion and the way you see it, and that's your view, okay? But you can't see it from my eyes, though. And we're sitting here, we're trying to do the best we can. And I would love to be able to accommodate everybody so that we can all just have this utopia and everybody get along. I would love to do that. That's just the type of person that I am. But we do have outliners. We have people picking up signs out of Skunk Hollow, talking about dogs and what you can and cannot do in there. People picking up signs. How immature is that? So we've got to think about everything. We've got to think that there are people, I've seen it. I'm on Highland Avenue, and I've seen people walking between the RCA building and my church, and they let the dogs walk through, and I've seen them allow the dogs to do their business, and if nobody's walking around, if they don't see any eyes, they walk right away. And then when you come from around the building and see them and catch them, oh, I was going to come back and get it. So I've seen this with my own eyes, is what I'm saying. This is what I have seen. So that's my feeling, okay? And that's where I'm looking at it from. But I am trying my best to be accommodating to everyone here, all right? It's just my view, okay? I'm not saying I hate dogs again, okay? And I'm not a time clock police officer either, okay? That's all. And go ahead.
Just to chime in about Dr. Piatt's comments and some other things. Globally, I land in the same spot I started. There should be 3 types of parks in the township: one that permits dogs off leash, one that permits dogs either on leash or with some type of control element, and one that does not have dogs. That is the balance to accommodate the users we have. I won't support any resolution or non-resolution that doesn't contain those 3 components. As to the proposal, I'm certainly willing to consider that and think through some of those things. I would just put a chime in on the Radnor Trail. I ride a bicycle. One of the worst things besides cars I could see on a trail is a leash, because dogs zig and zag, and then they create the clotheslining effect. And being on a bicycle, it's pretty dangerous. I'd actually prefer that to be a leash-free spot, just from a bicycle standpoint. I understand the the counter to that, but just putting 2 cents in for those who ride bikes. If playground equipment is one of the things you're looking at, Tennell does have that. It does not have a large amount of equipment, but I'm certainly receptive to considering that, and we can kick that around, but I think I've gone around in circles on that. My North Star on that is the 3 types of parks, and if we can get that done and some other accommodations, I'm fine with that. One of the problems with limiting and having ball field usage and those kinds of caveats is I think what we have is sort of a mess anyway, without clarity. And I think one of the objectives was to try to get some clarity. And when we start putting exceptions in, it whittles away the clarity. Doesn't mean clarity has to be what controls, but that's one of the downsides when we start carving out, piece by piece. But I'm willing to consider it, and I think it's something we can look at in our next meeting, certainly.
I think the difficulty that arose with the question of allowing Ditmar Park to have dogs kind of opened up this kind of can of worms, because the reality is once you start to open it, then you become either a completely dog-free park system, or you become the opposite with no dogs in parks. They're 2 extremes, and we're trying to find that middle ground. I don't know how we or board is going to tackle that, in terms of what one belongs in that, whether we're going to have to vote on each one as part of it. I just recognize that the majority of the parks up there have similar characteristics, with the exception of the Tap Trail and the Radnor Trail. I think we're going to have a serious conversation and a vote about Radnor Tap and Radnor Trail in terms of the benefit. I, like you,
No one uses Radnor Tap, so don't worry about it.
But the future, we're trying to think of the future, because if it is extended, then we're going to have a community here 20 years ago talking about the same thing. So I'd rather resolve it now. I think we can get more opinion about the leash rules on that trail, but I do view it as an extension of road and extension of a sidewalk system. As a biker myself, the longest leashes are the ones I worry about, but I have concerns about that loose dog on the trail. It's more of a confrontational space that I've witnessed in terms of dogs when they're approaching each other. It's where we need more control, and I would argue strongly that that would be the space that that was in, and I think there's be enough community support for that. Now, we can argue that one, but I think the others are my point, that I've heard enough community input that I think we should seriously be moving them to the category of B. I think if we leave them in this current vote, I know I'm not supportive of it, and I don't think the community is itself, nor the commissioners would necessarily be supportive of it, because they're getting feedback from it as well. So I'm just trying to find something we could move forward that is a reasonable attempt to put safety in place, let our community know that we're trying to message as well to those park users and dog owners. We're trying to maintain this privilege, and when we can get these complaints about aggressive dogs and bad behavior, this is what's driving this. And we as a community have to self-police to some degree. But I think I would, again, try to advocate us having communication to move some of those parks in A to the category B. I think we can word this in a way that respectfully people can have dogs on leash during game play in parks. I think that's enforceable, and you can set up a degree of a code, particularly if you have a dog that's misbehaving. You can go up and say, as a law enforcement officer, your dog needs to be on a leash. Whereas they can go to code and say, no, my dog has to be under control. It's under control, but it's running around. So I would say that under those circumstances, allow our law enforcement to be able to say, your dog needs to be on a leash under control under this circumstance. So I think we can put that in the language, and I think it's enforceable. Where I think this is, where it's at, is going to be extremely challenged to enforce. And my question to Tammy and from the Board of Commissioners as well is how enforceable this would be. I think it's going to be a challenge to enforce this. And that's why I would say that moving the majority of these to B would be enforceable. And I think signage, as ongoing attempts to educate, is where the direction would be with that. So.
The only comment I would make is sort of twofold. One, this sort of moving of categories, I don't think it's something that can be done lightly, just simply because we didn't pull this out of thin air. This came directly from what the township has already designated, and I'm sure there's a history, and I'm sure there's a review, and there was analysis that was done. I don't, that's something better for Tammy to make, so I think just easily moving parks within the categories is not something that I think is just, let's just move it here. I think there's some history that has to be reviewed. I'm sure there was a basis behind it before. So that's one concern. I do have with that sort of approach. If that's an undertaking the board wants to undergo, I think that's fine. But again, this is just putting in what's already on the Radnor Township website. And let's be clear, as much as this is, whether this would pass, whether what Clark's proposing would pass, it's not going to be very enforceable. None of this is. These are basically recommendations. I mean, the Radnor police have so much more important things to be doing than going around and ticketing people without leashes. So, I think that's sort of, we just have to consider that reality. Whatever is passed is just not reasonably going to be enforced. The police were telling us back in 2020, 2018. The best enforcement is community members who have responsible dogs and show by example how those dogs should act. And again, while I haven't had any unfortunate incidents with dogs besides tripping over like one of those retractable 30-foot leashes at Enke Park one time, I'm sure others have. So I think the enforceability of this is, questionable at best, regardless of what is recommended by the board.
It just goes to the point of, why we would push this through if we don't think it's an enforceable policy. And I again, look to where it's going to make a difference and where safety matters. I think, personally, the Radnor Trail and the Tap Trail are the two on that list. I know there's a concern about it, but the rest, I think it boils down to just making sure that we have adequate signage and recognizing that those parks are off leash. So when you do go in those parks, you know what they are, and maintaining the other parks that are not allowing dogs. Just because once we go there, it opens every other park to the same policy, and then it makes it more complicated. I think we do need parks that do not, and the majority of the others that are on the list of no dogs are mostly playing fields. And parks that are designated as ball fields and the like. So, respectfully with Ditmar, I think we'd obviously like to accommodate, but at the same time, we just don't want to set of dominoes that every park changes, because then it would have to be.
Walking trail on it already?
I know.
Walking trail, so it's.
But we can make the argument with all the other parks is the concern. So.
But there's no sidewalks where I live. It's kind of dangerous walking on Maplewood.
Understood. Yeah, Maplewood is a very difficult road to navigate. It's not a walkable road. No.
Well, thanks for considering it.
Are you open for more comment, or I don't know how this works, so if you.
I think it's when we're done.
I just want to repeat a point I've made before, and that is, we have stop signs that aren't enforced. We have speed limits that aren't enforced. I think one of the things is setting at least an expectation or a community via our Board of Commissioners, wherever they decide to do, what a standard is. Most laws are not enforced with any great degree, and if that's the approach we take, and that's the default we land on, I move that we tell the Board of Commissioners leave things alone. If that's our view, that's where we have to go.
It would be status quo.
Leave the whole thing status quo?
And this is not call and response,
Yeah.
but I will respond, and that is, if the view of the board is that whatever you pass is unenforceable, leave it the way it is.
I think this goes to just simplifying our decision-making, and it is not necessarily voting on this document, but breaking it down to several decisions, one of which was the initial question about Ditmar, yes or no, as a recommendation from this board. Simple answer from us. The second would be related to allowing the parks that are current remain in a status quo provision. All the green parks that were up there before, would stay basically under control, and that would be a yes or a no. And I guess the third would be the question related to specifically the high-traffic trails, the TAP and the Radnor Trail. And again, we can look to the standards for the other trails in the network. John, do you have any insight to this? As a cyclist who bikes a lot, ask an expert opinion.
Yeah, I would avoid the Radnor Trail on a bike because there's just too many people.
There are.
And honestly, what's worse than a dog on a leash is a child on training wheels.
We're not banning them, John. But I think that is the third. That's the third one. You know, whether or not we go there, because I think that is requires a thoughtful analysis to see if we needed to and put that leash law in place there. It's equivalent to what was done at the Willows, or Skunk Hollow, I should say. We put that policy in place just for weekends. The question is, do we need a specific leash law on those trails? So it breaks it down into those three elements that I would ask us to consider in January for a vote. Ditmar, allow those current green parks to remain under control. And 3 questions about the TAP and the Radnor Trail. And those would be the 3 questions that I would ask that we would vote on. I guess the fourth would be, do we want to vote on this as the first question, is it something we want to, that was already proposed, yay or nay? And those follow.
I think if you're not going to have leash as a part of the answer, and I'm not advocating one way or the other, then there's little utility in this amendment to the ordinance. And then we just have a recommendation to say, Ditmar, thumbs up, thumbs down, keep the parks the way they are or not, and if there's a carve-out on trails, then that's a recommendation, doesn't be an ordinance change. I don't really, and that's why I really don't see a whole lot of difference with this ordinance. We haven't changed the categories of parks from what they've always, at least during my time here, have always been.
They're maintained.
The most significant substantive change is the leash in defining the control in that manner. If we're not going to do that, then
Do you see any, or any board members see any relevance in having some type of language about during gameplay in those areas have leash, or do you feel that's, I'm just trying to set a tenor for those times where we're most worried? Or Tammy, is that something that's enforceable?
I think that's going to be tough. And I look back at the letter that we had received from Superintendent Flanagan. I think that
Sure.
could be a difficult thing to enforce and will make things more complicated. Just my personal opinion based on his letter.
I think the only stalwart to that is maintaining the other parks that are currently no dogs to stay that way. Stay that way. We need to have those areas, and the bigger exceptions would be like Emlyn, and that would be one that would be off leash. But again, all these could be changed by an event. So if there is ever an unfortunate event that occurs, it's going to change this overnight. So just for the community, it's a privilege right now. So we just don't want anyone or any animal hurt. So.
in the category under A now are under control off leash as it is. There's not a leash mandate, so we wouldn't be changing anything if that's what we landed on, unless there's some need or desire to codify what has been stated on the township website in some fashion to define those parks in a clear way. That might be something which is done. I don't know. I'm really more thinking out loud, not advocating, just kind of working through the logistics of where we go from here.
I mean, identifying what was on the website was what Tammy asked when the board asked us to draft this, to identify a leash as under control, and Tammy's request was that we identify the parks that are currently in the various categories in one place within the categories.
And Tammy, how would you qualify the Radnor Tap Trail and Radnor Trail currently in terms of leashing? How is that published, and what's the expectation of that rule?
Well, currently the Radnor Trail has an internal policy. Nothing is codified because it's not outlined currently in the code specifically.
Is it's signed?
It has a policy of etiquette outlined on the website,
But leashing is not,
as well as just an outline of the policy.
but no leashing signage.
I think there's signs that indicate, like, show a dog on leash, right at the bag stations.
The visual.
There's a
signage,
visual, but there's
not
nothing
a
that is
specific-
expressing it. The only thing that is expressing the requirement and/or recommendation of a leash is on the website under policy. So the thought would be is to formalize that in the codes. And then that ties to everything, you know, if we could basically take these policies that we have that are, you know, in various locations on the website and written materials, and if we can put them in the ordinance book so that then everybody has access to them in one place, the police department have the opportunity to look them up, understand them. Obviously, when this concludes, we're going to have a re-education process, so everyone internally, especially within the police department, understands what the current, you know, state of the policies are, and obviously they would be ordained, so the specific ordinances, so that they're in that location. And obviously, it would all be subject to the Board of Commissioners' review after it moves from the Parks Board.
Thanks.
Would you like to make a comment? Same rules apply.
Should I say who I am again?
Yes.
Cynthia Curley, 264 Willow, North Wayne. And I listened to all of your comments, and you all have very valid comments and concerns, et cetera. But I will reiterate, there are ways that everybody's concerns can be accommodated. And I listened to you and the idea of your young children being, you know, approached by big dogs. And I would say Skunk Hollow is kind of a little bit of an outlier. In my experience, a part of it is because it's the big open woods and the trails, and the dogs seem to just get really kind of out of control and almost pack-like. Even my little dog starts running down those trails like a crazy, you know, crazy little beast. So certain parks, I agree. Maybe certain parks, and hours. I was listening to all of you, and not one of you talked about this idea of maybe the off hours, and to use these parks that are not being used. And here there are people who have pets and animals, you know, dogs that would love to go play ball, and they're not allowed in that park, and nobody's using it. In the wintertime, it's empty. There's no one there, and we're being told that you can't even bring your dog there. How about let's setting some hours? You know, hours or seasons. There are other ways that we can accommodate that, where we can still let people have, you know, go to baseball games, and I'm fine with not even letting the dogs in there when there's play. I think that's reasonable. The long leashes on the Radnor Trail, oh my gosh, I mean, it's an invisible hazard that you're just waiting for some biker or even some kid on their bike, you know, coming by on their little tricycle. How about a 6-foot leash law on the Radnor Trail? But I think there are a lot of parks that are on this list that are saying no dogs in the park, and they're not being used for all of these hours. And that just seems wasteful to me and not fair to the community as a whole, that we don't use these parks and allow people that want to use them when the people aren't there. North Wayne Field is empty most of the time. Cowan Field is empty most of the time. And do you know how many dogs after COVID are in North Wayne? We have so many dogs in North Wayne, and most of the dogs are lovely dogs. Sometimes they get in little, you know, barking, you know, scuffles, but no attacks. I've never seen anything like that. I've never witnessed it with anyone. And I think we need to crack down. Like, if you have an aggressive dog, we all have phones. Even our 9-year-olds have phones. Take a picture of the dog, take a picture of the owner, call the police. There's an aggressive dog. This dog is growling at me. This dog is charging me. This dog, whatever. And have the police then talk to that owner and say, hey, we have complaints about your dog, not all dogs, because I feel like you're lumping all dogs into one category, and that's just not fair. It's just because there's one bad dog, you shouldn't penalize all the other dogs that are, you know, trying to just play some ball, play some simple ball, nothing dramatic. And I hear you about, like, you know, people who don't pick up after their dogs. Personally, my theory is if you don't pick up after your dog, I can't wait for you to step in it because you deserve it in spades. I'm the kind of person where I actually pick up other people's dog poop in the middle of the fields because I don't want to ruin it for everybody else, and they want to ruin it for other people. But if the worst thing happened, that a kid stepped in some dog poop, I stepped in a lot of dog poop growing up. I'm just fine. I'm not going to die over it. It's going to rain soon. It'll go away. We can't get too wrapped up in these things because one bad apple then we're all going to just run around living in these little pods and cocoons and not. And making more and more rules. You can't do this, you can't do that. Can't we just all live? And if you have a bad dog, and there are a lot of them out there, people, aren't training their dogs properly. To me, that's the thing we need to really crack down on, are people who are not controlling their dogs. And if you get 3 phone calls from, the police are getting 3 phone calls about your dog, then you're banned from the park. I mean, can't we just be more realistic about this than all dogs cannot be in parks, or all dogs can only be in these parks, and can't we find more middle ground? Than I feel like there's a little bit more black and white that all of you are talking about, where I feel as though there's a little bit more accommodation we can make here, and one of them being seasons and times when these parks are not being used at all, and then we're being told we can't use them either, and they sit there empty, and I witness it every day, all day long. I go up to North Wayne Field all the time. No one's there either. It's just kind of silly. And I think we have to kind of be a little bit more open to maybe some more variations within some of these guidelines than just dogs in park, not dogs in park, leash on, not leash on. Can we find some ground of finding time, or certain parks that are supposed to be, dog-free, but maybe they shouldn't be dog-free all the time? So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question for when you're talking about the hours, off hours? What are you thinking about for that?
I knew you were going to ask me that question. So I hadn't really thought about the exact hours, but I would say, in the mornings, no one's there. Kids aren't there. No one's in the park. So, from 6 a.m. until school lets out, no one is in those 2 parks, except dog walkers, people with dogs. And if you have some aggressive dogs, I would say, call the police and say there's an aggressive dog and take a picture and report it and crack down on that. And don't take your dog there until you feel that your dog is safe or you are safe. I mean, I understand that. And then, in the wintertime, I don't know what season, maybe it's the school year. Maybe it's dictated by the school year, that during the school year, whether that's, September or Labor Day to Memorial Day or something along those lines. And then in the evenings, there are no kids. There's no one playing in those parks in the field. The only kids that are there, only people using the park, at least at Cowan, is basketball players, and they couldn't care less about what's going on with the dogs. And then in North Wayne Field, no one is in those fields in the evenings, before dusk.
If I could just clarify, they are permitted at North Wayne. Dogs are permitted at North Wayne.
No, Cowan. I was talking about Cowan.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because I thought you referenced North Wayne Park and Cowan.
Yeah, well, and again, I'm not sure what the changes to the laws were being proposed in North Wayne, but my point is that.
There weren't any.
None.
Okay.
Cowan is where she's saying.
I understand that, and
None of
I've
the
heard that
parks are
request
changing
before.
category.
So I think that North Wayne Field, though, if people are proposing or someone's considering keeping them out, I want to propose no one's using those during those hours. And I think that's probably the case with a lot of these playing fields, correct? During the school year, they're not used a lot? That's a question for you, Tammy.
It depends. I mean, we do get some requests if the weather's nice for field usage where teams do use them. So again, I think it just ties back to we want to provide a situation for our police department where they have a true understanding of where dogs are permitted and when they're not. And when we start to get into restricted times, seasons, things like that, it just makes it more difficult. So, I mean, I would just suggest that, if there is truly a community desire for Cowan, then similar to Ditmar and where the commissioner brought it forward, then maybe there has to be a community push, to move forward on that in a different way if that's a true desire. But again, it could be looked at from both sides because it is a field that is used a lot for ball teams and programming.
At certain times of the year, but most of the
Exactly.
year, yeah, and it's like 3 or 4 months a year.
Right, but the same logic also applies to the other sports fields, when you look at places like Ditmar and Radnor Memorial
Well,
and
that was-
Philippone, Beau Connor.
And that's kind of part of my point here too, is that I don't know about each field, but, and each park, but each park, maybe we should be looking at it and saying, how often are these fields being used? And that might be, something to review, to come up with a solution as to making it more welcoming to dog owners, because I don't want to exclude anyone. I don't want anyone's children to be intimidated. I don't want anyone's bike to be, but I genuinely feel there are ways that we can find some middle ground here. So anyhow, that was a long answer to your question.
Was there new signage put up after the Skunk Hollow, like the rules changed?
Go to the microphone.
Oh. I'm Meredith Riedel, 111 Garrett Avenue. I'm neighbors with Kim and John, actually. So sorry I missed the first portion. I have 2 small kids and was wrestling with them before we left. But so was there new signs put up in Skunk Hollow after the new rules changed?
After the ordinance was passed by the Board of Commissioners last March,
And did I hear correctly, people have been taking them down?
there was some, from what we understand, there was some vandalism to the signs.
Okay, that's unfortunate.
Yes, no, and if I could just interject real quickly.
Yeah.
One thing I want to make clear, this proposal in no way moved any parks from one category to another. There's no restrictions.
Yeah, and this is just about the new proposal.
This proposal, the categories they are in, is the current categories according to the Radnor Township website. So
Got it.
Cowan is in that group because on the Radnor Township website, that's the group that Cowan's currently in. Whether that needs to change based, as Tammy suggested, for like community participation, those are all very valid things, but that was not, I mean, as of right now, Cowan's in the category it's in. This rule regulation doesn't change that.
Okay. Yeah, more so, I mean, I live right next to Tennelle, so part of the crew that bring their dogs. I guess the concern, I think, goes back to the signage, which is why I brought it up, because so many people, we go to Skunk Hollow pretty much weekly, on a weekly basis. We bring our kids also. I actually am more worried about bringing my kids when dogs are on leash, just because I've seen both sides of it. I mean, it's kind of a decision as a parent to bring your kids to a park where there's dogs. There's an element of danger. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. My 4-year-old gets really scared of dogs coming up to her too, but we get past it, we move on. She's also terrified of the trash truck, and I can't stop the trash truck from coming to our house. So it's just an element of control there, I guess. And neighbors that I've spoken to that also bring their dogs to Skunk Hollow, they have absolutely no idea that there was ever any change in rules. So I guess it's like, if people didn't even know that that was happening, what is going to make this happen also? Like, how are people gonna know? How is this really gonna be enforced if we can't even keep signs up, if we can't get new signs, things like that. So, and furthermore, you know, like John and Kim, it's a community thing with our dogs. We bring our kids every single day with our dogs. I've never seen anything happen off leash. I know it has happened before, but it's a respect thing and it's a decision thing. You know, in a perfect world, there would be no poop in your yard and there would be no incidents. I have some strange neighbors on Garrett Avenue. One that lets his dog poop in my yard almost every single day, and that dog has never been off a leash before. So you just can't control people. You know, if in a perfect world, there would be no dogs and no poop and no incidents, and our kids would always feel like they were safe constantly, but we don't. So it's just what we decide what to do and how respectful we are to our neighbors. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Ian, can you get this up on screen again? Howard, you were saying that, so I just wanted to put this up. It's okay, my dog is friendly. And they're like, no, it's not okay. Just because your dog is friendly doesn't mean other dogs are. Some may be nervous, reactive, fearful in training, or owned by people who just want to be left alone. Never let your dog run up to another dog or people. Respect others and their need for space. If you have no voice control over your dog, let them or keep them on a leash. You know who pointed this sign out to me? It's not on our trail. It's actually Friends of Skunk Hollow off leash. It would be great if we had this sign. I think what we need is a culture. We need community partnership. We still need people to understand what it means to have good off-leash control. And whether you do that in the code, maybe you don't do that in the code, but I think that's why Lower Merion, a lot of that the control definition came from the Lower Merion site for permitting. And I know you said we don't want to get into the bureaucracy of off-leash permitting, and that's probably a bit too much for our township. But I think we need to, as our township is going to grow, it's going to grow in population, we don't want to have this fearful of taking my kids to the park or fear of being run over on the bike path or being run over at a stop sign. So I think we need to partner to get community cooperation. And we are really putting Tammy and the police in a hard place of how do we engage their support. I mean, Tammy works a lot to get all these programs going, and she's trying to do right by us. And what do the residents want? We have to work together.
I agree. Sandy, thank you. I would say we're not reviewing Skunk Hollow again, and that's where that sign is most appropriate. It would be great to have those comments when the review for Skunk Hollow is coming up.
It's not just about Skunk Hollow, but all these other parks.
Understandable. I would say that we're looking to specifically Skunk Hollow, the community. I know we've had a lot of voices that are in favor of that park and making it a better place. I think we're looking to nurture a community of people who can bring recommendations like that forward. So I encourage them when we do review at certain parks in particular, but that's duly noted for now. And this goes to Tammy about appropriate signage. Thank you.
Nick Spitel, 124 Wooded Lane, Villanova. First of all, I want to apologize. I was on a flight all day, drove up 476 in traffic, and I'm starving right now, so I do apologize. I feel much better after hearing everyone's suggestions, and I took notes, and I really think from hearing everyone, it's just people looking for a place where they can exercise their dog off leash and then be respectful to people like yourselves that are not dog owners. And I feel I'm a very respectful dog owner. I've trained my dog well, but there are bad apples, and I think, people have to start speaking up when they do see that. So, I appreciate this discussion, and I do feel better after hearing, being here and not just reading about it. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. just one.
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue. I've lived in my home for 43 years. I've had a dog for 26 years. And I walk a lot. Emlyn Tunnel, outside of the baseball, which is in the afternoons, that field is dead water from about 9 o'clock in the morning until early evening. We have a trail, a walking circuit. I think people should use more self-control and have some more respect for space. Most people, I see very little errant piles of dog poo at Emlyn Tunnel, and that's the field I know. When I had another little dog, I tried going to Harford Park. The dog ended up in the Radnor Corporate Center. So I can't take a little dog, and particularly I can't take the dog I have now. She's a runner. She will never be off a leash. But the piece that I think we've forgotten about, I think it's appropriate during ball games, and I'll only use Emlyn Tunnel because that's what I know. The dog should be on a leash. My dog is so small and so friendly that I feel that having her walk the trail during games helps the little children become socialized to animals. I think it's a benefit, not a deterrence. But I would like us to be more, us, the public, to be more responsible in what we're doing. We don't need all these rules where everything is out if we will take some responsibility for what we do. And that's the piece that I think is missing.
Right, correct. I'm with you on that.
And if you expect it, gradually they learn it and society's better. For Emlyn Tunnel specifically, the people who use Emlyn Tunnel, most of them live on Garrett Avenue, above Conestoga. We are a neighborhood. It's how we communicate with each other. It's how we know how people, other residents are doing. And we can offer support to each other because we see each other at the park. And I think that needs to be kept in mind. COVID sort of screwed with a sense of community. And I really believe that all of us need to look to ways to rebuild community to make it a better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you.
Howard, sorry,
I'm sorry.
over here.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I agree with what Sarah said. I agree with what Board Member Fulton said also. And I've seen dogs that are taller than the kids, and the kids are scared. I do not think those kids are coming back to that park. Tunnel, I was there today, saw somebody on the field throwing a ball, but it was right in the middle of the field. There was plenty of other space, but they were right in the middle of the field. And the signs say all pets must be under control, and it shows an owner with a leash and a dog. Please clean up after your pet. Then another sign, no dogs allowed in athletic field areas. And there's signs all the way around that park, as we know. Some people just don't follow the rules. There's rules in Cowan, says no dogs allowed. That's for that whole thing. It's a tight little park. My father would always say, you know, a stop sign doesn't stop the car, a person does. So whatever we do, it would be nice if the people just followed the rules. We're trying to make the rules so everybody can have the best of all the worlds. But it's tough, especially some don't follow the rules. And not to bring it up, but every time I go to Skunk Hollow, I see the examples of what shouldn't be done. And this is just a test period. People stealing signs, people going there, letting their dog loose when they're not supposed to let their dog loose. They let the dog loose right in the parking lot, and it zips around multiple cars in the parking lot. It's a tough job you guys have. Thank you.
Did we want to scrap this idea now and move forward, or what?
I think we can move on to the next agenda.
Yeah.
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 If we thought it'll be on our agenda next time to
Okay,
do what we're gonna do here.
okay.
If I could just add one comment, the one thing I think that that last round of public participation really highlighted is any changes among categories is something that requires, I think, a great deal of thought and not just can be done, I think, sort of based on one meeting or on the fly. I mean, I think that, you know, examples of this discussions about Tennell and Cowan, there's reasons they're in the current categories. There may be reasons to change what categories they go into, but I don't think that's something that can be done just, you know, very quickly if the board were to choose to take that route. So
I would agree, and it goes to that initial draft in terms of it was comprehensive in changing many things, but I would say you could vote on each one individually.
I don't disagree with that. I just don't think it's something that can be done absent getting some feedback from the township of why they're in that category in the first place, and then feedback from the township, much like the public just discussed. That's all I'm making the point of.
Agree. I think it essentially takes that draft and makes it unable to really kind of move forward, and it makes it an individualized decision. You have to look at each one with merit.
Okay. We're gonna move on now. We'll have the.
Can we just make sure the
I'm sorry?
timeline's clear? I'm sorry, moving forward, just so anybody that's listening at home, I suspect we have a lot of people that have tuned in tonight that didn't come out, just so they're clear what the next steps are.
I would propose we table a vote on anything tonight on this, and we come back and with preparation that we're gonna come out of the next meeting with some recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. That's
Okay,
my proposal.
So does that mean in the meantime that we can remove the current resolution and just add a note that basically they can watch this meeting for an update, and then that the decisions will be made, or the recommendations will be made January 16th meeting?
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people are looking at the resolution online and.
I would move that we table the resolution.
Okay.
I would second that.
Yeah.
Let us, just,
No.
from our part, your motion is, and I would second that. And for clarity, I would move that next meeting, we vote to ask individualized questions about Ditmar Park, which was the original question, which is a yes or no. Number two, at least have the discussion about the Radnor Tap Trail and the Radnor Trail in terms of leash and whether that's something we want to proceed with or not. I think that's it, unless, Bill, you see anything else?
I think we need to dispose of the resolution one way or the other next time. That's my thinking on this.
I think that's where we're at now.
And we might be saying the same thing with different verbiage.
We are.
But whether it's amending it to something else, scrapping it entirely, or voting as is, I think those are the three courses of action we should aim to have next time.
I think
I
Clark's
think
saying.
after 5 years, I'm not sure what more we're going to learn that we haven't learned already.
Yeah,
I think
I
Clark's.
we need action.
I think Clark's saying we could scrap it right now.
Well,
Well, it would be ideal to take the existing policies and at least make a recommendation to forward those along. Like, I realize that Ditmar may be an exception, the Radnor Tap Trail may be an exception, and the Radnor Trail may be an exception, but to at least codify that of which is existing, that way we can get that into the code book, well, provided, of course, it's obviously voted upon by the Board of Commissioners.
We would is it modifying the document that we have to reflect the status quo?
If it means editing it so that we could do that, I
Do
think
you
that
have
would
a
be really
similar-
helpful.
Do you have a similar document that represents the status quo?
Only what's on the website when you look at the map and you look at the list of parks. And I think it would be helpful for them to, again, ordain that and then add in whatever ends up being voted upon or recommended by way of Ditmar and the two trails.
the status quo could be achieved by removing from section A the words "with a physical leash no longer than 6 feet in length." If you do that, I think you've codified the current
Does it differentiate?
policy, with the possible exception of Section E, which deals with service dogs and emotional support dogs. I
How
don't
does
know
it-
what our policy is or what we've done on that,
How does it differentiate from B?
and remove it from B.
But wouldn't A and B just be the same? Basically, A would move into B. Um,
No, because B talks about on the park grounds, no leash, outside leash, in the parking lot leash. That's what B says. Whereas A seeks to change the current status of the law, which is under control, to put a more specific limiter on that being a leash. If you remove the leash from A, that's what we have now, under control of the owner at all times in X, Y, and Z parks. And then the second category with the permitted off-leash, with the exception of the parking lot, which is what we have here, and Skunk Hollow, which we've already, I think that's already been codified.
Why wouldn't we put that exception in? Why wouldn't the parking lot be the same rule for A, for those in A?
Well, I mean, I'm just, that's not currently what we have. I think the topic was, how do we get from this to just codifying what the current policy is? That's how you do it. You take the leash comments out and substitute them or leave them as under control of the owners. And that leaves us where we are now.
That, or you could abandon the resolution and just put it forth as a motion as well. If there's other detail in here that needs to be, I mean, if you want to keep all the detail in here, that's great. All of that won't go into the code book, obviously, but if you wanted to simplify it into a motion, you could do that as well and eliminate anything contemplated with regards to the service animals. And we could ask John Rice to provide some guidance on that, our township solicitor. It's
I would
just a thought.
I would just think the parking lot provision would be applicable to them all. I don't know why we differentiate.
No, I think that would be helpful to clarify that as well.
Why would we have all these other parks with, you have a leash in this parking lot, but not that? It's just like, it should be the same, I would think.
But A says at all times.
Right.
So I think that would include the parking lot as well.
You have three categories. A, which is under the current state of the law, under control, period. B is off-leash, except in the parking lot, and C is no dogs. And that's, if you remove the leash language from A, I think that lands you at the same spot.
Okay.
And you can leave or you can change the leash language in B to under control of the owner to make it consistent with A.
Bill, I'll take your word on that. If that's what we needed to modify it, so be it. And that would be the amendment that we would vote on for this to codify it for you?
Yes.
And we vote on that next meeting?
Yes, I would just suggest that if we could maybe clean up the draft
Fine.
within the next few days, and then we could put it back out there so folks can see it.
The
If that's
only
okay.
exception would be is if we had a vote for the Tap Trail or Radnor Trail
True.
to
True,
fall
that-
into.
You're right, true.
Because it would be essentially what we've done at Skunk Hollow. You put a notification of a leash in a certain park for a certain reason at a certain time, right? So that would be the only, and that would be a vote before we do this.
Right. But if we cleaned it up and we put it out there, we could maybe highlight those, that they are going to be voted too, so that that's clear for folks.
Okay.
Right, so why don't we, here's my suggestion on this. Why don't we clean up, so to speak, the language to try to codify the current formal/informal policy we have, and then for discussion next time, discuss whether or not any of the parks in any category should be moved to a different category, and then, depending on how those discussions go, vote on what it is that if we have a consensus for where the parks belong, then we can vote on it. That's my thought on it.
And given the fact you made a motion, I seconded it before, do we have to vote on that tonight? Or
I think we have to vote on tabling.
tabling?
We have a
So-
first and a second. The Roberts rules will tell us we now need to vote
So
on
that
it.
would be by rules, it would go to you to make a vote.
Correct.
And we would do that now.
Vote on the fact that, okay.
The motion, it's your call to order on it. The motion is to table this particular proposal till next meeting.
There's a motion on the floor to table this resolution, or this, to table this for tonight until the next board meeting in January.
Right.
And do I have a yay or nay with that?
I'll say yay.
Say yay.
It's been motioned and second. Okay.
What else do we have tonight, Howard?
We're gonna get, I'm waiting for Tammy. She's handling.
She has a brief report for us.
And would Tammy have a brief report for us for the Parks and Rec?
I'll have a brief report, yes. Ian, if you could just bring up the screen real quick. I just wanted to announce that we're going to be opening our registration that sells out very quickly for our 14th annual Radnor Sweetheart Dance that takes place at the Inn at Villanova University. And that'll be on Monday, December 16th at 9:00 a.m. For anybody that's interested in registering, they can go to radnor.com/recreation and jump onto our online registration portal where they can register. Usually by 2 to 3 hours, the event sells out with about 325 participants. And it's a great annual tradition. So if you are interested, make sure in advance, if you don't have a registration account set up already in our MyRec online registration software system, you should go on and create one ahead of time just to avoid any delays that could occur on Monday morning. So if anyone has trouble with that or they have any questions, of course, they can reach out to us by email at recreation@radnor.org, or they could give us a call and we'll be glad to help them out. It's a great event. Again, 14 amazing years the event's been running.
Quick question.
Sure.
Is there an age limit on there? I saw where it says 3 to 12. Is there?
We're flexible,
Okay. All
but
right.
you be accommodated by an adult, by a parent.
Okay.
We're flexible there. We also have upcoming the wreath laying for the Bishop Richard Allen Park and Bishop Richard Allen's birthday celebration that happens on February 14th every year. This will be at 12:15 p.m. at Bishop Richard Allen Park. So we'll be looking forward to that event. It's a nice event. It's short, so if anybody is available on that Friday and they want to come over, hopefully it won't be too cold outside. And it's a great celebration and recognition of the history of not only the park, but of course, Bishop Richard Allen. I wanted to highlight, just really quick, Sunday, you might have heard the lights, seen the lights and heard the sirens throughout the township. We had our 12th annual Sands delivery that took place throughout the day. It was a really amazing day, 5 major motorcades with police motorcycles, police vehicles, fire engines from some local companies that supported us this year, traversing throughout the township, delivering the pre-registered gifts. This year we had 1,806 gifts total, bringing us to our highest total of gifts, as well as our highest total of households at 758 in the 12-year history of the event. Noteworthy also, we collected 289 toys that went to the Radnor Township Civic Association for their upcoming holiday party that'll be provided to kids in need here in Radnor Township, as well as a significant amount of toys that are going to go to the Toys for Tots organization. We had cash contributions that were also provided towards the Toys for Tots, and then we also were collecting pantry items in cooperation with Wayne Cares with 376 items that we had collected. So it was a huge success and really just a great event. We especially want to thank the Radnor Police Department that helps us with this event, and in particular putting together the 5 routes that really go on for anywhere from 3 to 5 hours on Sunday. It's really a long journey for everyone who's out there. I do want to say thank you also to Mr. Remfrey on our Parks and Recreation Board. He joined us on the Zone 5 motorcade now. I think this is his 4th year with his wife Emily and friend Claudia. And we have an amazing time. And our Santa is our former Parks and Recreation Board member, Bill Quinn. And it's really a whole lot of fun. Penguin Fire Company was our fire company that had command on the engine. We also want to thank Paoli Fire Company for joining us this year. They were on one of the other routes for the first year. And of course, Broomall, Bryn Mawr, and Radnor Fire Company, who have joined us for several years. So it's a really exciting event. As you can see, there's lots of great pictures. We also, on our route, we had a puppy delivery again. Last year, we had 2 puppies that were delivered. I'm happy to say that the 2 golden retrievers that we delivered last year are alive and thriving. I think they're about 6 times their size now. We did get to see them as the family participated again this year. And then we had the delivery of an Australian Labradoodle this year. A little puppy, you could see her, she's there in the upper left-hand corner of the picture. And she was delivered to a family, and perhaps we'll see her again next year, and she'll be a little bit bigger. So a really exciting event, a great tradition that we really are always excited to deliver.
Tammy, if I could just interrupt for
Sure.
a moment. You've left one group of people off, and I know it wasn't intentional, maybe it was, but your staff, you, and all the folks that put this together, sort of being on the inside of this, the logistical excellence and the lifting, it's unbelievable how smoothly. If we could have that group run larger elements of government, we'd be in great shape. It's just spectacular, and a huge thank you to everybody here in the building that made that happen too, in addition to all the folks that you said.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I'll recognize my staff because, of course, they're at the forefront of that. When the gifts are rolling in, we have a little makeshift fireplace that's right over there at the door to our entrance. We're collecting the gifts. There's a processing that goes through with that. So I really want to thank Natalie, Tracy, and Heather. They're each out the day of the event on their own motorcades. We also have police staff that are working as part of the event. And we definitely could bottle and sell the system. I think we've got it down. So just a few more updates. I wanted to update that the Board of Commissioners did pass their budget on the 9th. So the township's operating budget was passed, and I don't know if anyone's been paying attention, but there was a lot of discussion about the township administering credit card fees. So credit card fees were voted as part of the budget in terms of a revenue generation that they would turn back to the township. And the Parks and Recreation Department, of course, is part of that. And, you know, we have thousands of transactions, of course, that happen over the course of a year. So over the years, we've always had credit card fees, but the township has absorbed those. So if you pay for a parking ticket, or you pay for a recreation program, or if you pay for your taxes or your sewer bill, you don't necessarily see a percentage that's broken out. So that's going to change moving forward. In our area of interest, we've always absorbed the fee. So we've usually added a percentage to many of our programs that generally take into effect some direct costs that come associated with the program, whether it's instructors' fees, vendors' fees, administrative fees that happen as a result of processing through our recreation system, and also the credit card fees. So our goal is to work internally to continue to keep the prices for programming as flat as we can, as well as for services. So if you're renting, you know, the gym facility, or you're renting a field, things of that nature. So we are working through that. A decision hasn't been made exactly yet on how those fees will look, but our goal is to keep them absorbed as part of a general fee that people see, and obviously trying not to turn around higher fees as a result of it, because we truly have been absorbing them in over the last several years when we started to understand what the assignment of them looked like, especially when we moved towards our recreation system, where we now capture a lot of credit cards, whereas before we took a lot of checks and cash payments and things like that. I'm probably showing my age. I've been here long enough that I've seen a lot of checks and a lot of cash, more than I've seen credit cards. So I wanted to acknowledge that because I just want to keep the board up to date on it and how it unfolds, just so people kind of understand, what they're seeing. I wanted to acknowledge a few other quick things. So the aerial that I'm showing you here is Clemacrone Park, and I have circled 3 rain gardens that are in the park. So when we had a construction to improve the park back in 2017, there were rain gardens that were installed as part of the infrastructure changes and elements that were added to the park, as well as also a goal of capturing runoff coming from Rockingham, and then of course dispersing and releasing down into the stream at Valley Run. And we also have a rain garden at the front of the park. So this isn't showing 3 separate rain gardens. It's just the same image of the first rain garden here at the entrance to the park. This rain garden was constructed by a grant in 2014, 2012, somewhere in that time frame, by a group of residents that were able to get a grant and work through the process with community volunteers in installing the rain garden. So the members of the community and the EAC had taken note that the rain garden had been removed. It had caused quite a bit of consternation and concern within the community. So what you're looking at right here in particular with this rain garden, if you were to drive over there today and look at it, it's completely wiped out and there's 2 trees that have been installed. So there was some internal miscommunication. I'll just chalk it up to that in terms of why the rain garden was removed, but we're working to reinstall it. In fact, I've been meeting with different companies to go back and see what we can do to reestablish not only this rain garden, but to also reestablish the 3 that are inside the park that we haven't been maintaining. There's a lot of weeds that are growing in them. In fact, we have trees growing in them that are basically weeds. That have, as you can kind of see there, if you were to drive by the park, during, let's say, September, you would see large trees poking out of there, and they're not functioning. So the goal is to get them back on track. I'm going to be meeting with the EAC next Wednesday. They had significant concerns, so I'm going to kind of step them through where we are, what our process is, and ultimately, we want to get to the point where they're reestablished and functioning, and then determine if we can implement a program to maintain them moving forward as a rain garden, which does take into consideration a significant amount of work, especially at the onset, before the native plants that are supposed to be in there establish themselves by removing all of the invasives and all of the weeds. It's probably going to be something we're going to have to contract out to a firm to come in and do it. And or if we're able to rally volunteers, provide some education. We have a couple of firms that do this as part of their landscaping businesses, to where we may be able to provide some community education and train some folks. We also have 3 rain gardens right out here that abut Enke Park. So the next goal is going to be to reestablish those, get them thriving. I know I've had some contact with the Radnor Conservancy to kind of see if we could get them back out. I think they were responsible for establishing at least one of the rain gardens out front here. These are so well-intentioned, and I know we keep talking about them with a lot of upcoming park projects with Odoricio on the horizon, Fenimore on the horizon, and we really need to establish a procedure and a plan moving forward so that we don't end up abandoning them, ripping them out after making considerable investment, because in 2017 when we constructed Clemacrone Park, we made a considerable investment. So it's really important that we carry that out moving forward. So I wanted to bring that up because, again, I don't know if any of you were part of any of the communications that were going on in the community, but if you've seen or heard anything on that, that's where we are right now with those. So I don't know if anybody has any questions on that. Otherwise, I'd just.
Tammy, was that maintenance built into the initial expectations when they were constructed?
They were not for Clemacrone. So when they were constructed with the Clemacrone project, our understanding is that we would maintain them in-house. In fact, we maintained them for a while, and then Clemacrone with these 3 that were constructed as part of the project, we ended up we had engaged in litigation at one point with our contractor because at some point the soils became compacted. So that sort of dragged out for a while. And then at that point, the maintenance was just never undertaken, you know, once we sort of settled that situation. Now, the rain garden, kind of similar, we had volunteers come out, they did some work for many years. We actually had them come out in 2017 when we constructed the park to help make that front rain garden, you know, look good, and, you know, was, the weeds and everything, the invasives were removed. It was kind of reset, if you will. But then again, just something that just wasn't carried out. And I know that, you know, the residents are always well-intentioned with these things, but we need to usher it through
What kind of
more
cost-
actively.
What kind of cost are we looking at to?
I don't
reduce?
know yet. I'm waiting on proposals,
I
so.
just, if it's, you just look at the sustainability and the maintenance, and you gotta weigh the cost, it just, it requires a lot of care for those kind of things.
It does, especially on the onset for the first couple years.
Yeah, they look great, and then you have to maintain them.
Right, and so, you know, and it just, it ties to a greater conversation. We're having a lot of conversations right now at the EAC about meadows, establishing meadows, which is different than no-mow zones, where the area is just sort of left to go to its own devices. You know, meadows also require time-intensive maintenance, especially at the onset, until the native grasses can take over and then, you know, kind of suffocate the invasives, if you will. It's a very long process. It requires a lot of time. And then also just continuing to look at other, you know, best management practices for how we can channel stormwater through different methods that maybe aren't so intensive in terms of their ongoing maintenance. So there'll be just an important thing for us to look at as Odoricio nears and
Because they were being
and
factored
Fenimore.
in Odoricio too. I just hate to think of putting a massive one in there, and then 10 years later, you know, there's invasive vines from the back part grow right over.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of an investment that goes into it too. I mean, at Clemacrone, there was tens of thousands of dollars that were just invested into these three when we went to construction. So it's very important moving forward that we evaluate them, see what the costs are going to be. Obviously, these ones are going to have a reestablishment cost, and then taking a look to see what the maintenance ongoing is going to look like. And then that's going to help educate us for a lot of these other projects that'll be forthcoming. The other thing, just to switch gears real quick, the Willows Park, we went to bid and recently awarded construction for the renovation of the driveway and the parking lots. We're also evaluating the lighting there and how we'll incorporate that potentially into the parking lot and into the roadway that leads up to the Willows Mansion. So I'm working with the Willows Park Preserve on that. So there will be some disruptions after the beginning of the year once we end up going to construction on the roadway. I don't have a timeline yet, but we're working through that and what that will look like. And then we're also evaluating renovating, of course, consistent with the history, the entrance facade, the entrance areas, and the exit area to the Willows Park for renovation. It's been something that's been on our list that we're finally working through. And again, it'll all be it'll be consistent with the history of the existing block walls and plastered walls that are there now.
Is the cottage on the radar for maintenance and future use, or is that
Well,
just on the back burner?
It's still on the back burner. I had engaged a company for feasibility and proposal to bring the cottage in a adaptive reuse, at least portions of it, potentially for a bathroom facility, a gathering space for folks in the community. And right now, there's just not funding to pursue that, to pursue an extensive study of what that would look like. We know there's a lot of help that's needed with the cottage.
Sure. I just think we need to continue to push for it. It's going to be another problem if we don't address it.
So just going back to, and I know it's on our agenda, the operating budget of the township, as well as the rolling fleet capital and some other areas were approved, but in 2025, there's the capital plan, of which, you know, the cottage sits in there, the old bathhouse that's at the mansion sits there, South Devon Playground. I mean, all of these projects sit in that plan and currently is unfunded for 2025. So that is going to be something that we'll be deferring, out to 2026, and hopefully working with the Board of Commissioners once we get back into our 2026 budget preparations. And then hopefully coming as a culmination here soon of the comprehensive plan, which has been presented in 3 different phases to the commissioners over the last 3 meetings that they have had. They'll be looking to potentially adopt the plan in the new year. And a lot of the things that that plan calls out is park maintenance, sustainability, best practice management of things like rain gardens, meadows, sustainable areas and things like that, trees and planting trees in our parks. All of those are things that are going to require funding, with the adoption of that plan could potentially be a catalyst to get us there. And I know the commissioners are going to be looking at that very closely. So that kind of provides an update on the comp plan too, which I
Is
know
the
is also
Skunk
on our
Hollow,
agenda.
is the Skunk Hollow Bridge that's associated with going to the mulch field, the lower one, is that also on radar for making sure it's going to be usable in the next 10 years?
The one near the parking lot?
Yeah, the one that has railings that are kind of somewhat old, and is that going to survive 10 years?
It's on the radar. So I know it's not currently in the plan.
Yeah.
I need to take a look at the stormwater plan. Steve may have it allocated in there, because sometimes the bridges aren't necessarily my purview, like Ithan Valley, for instance. We just had the exit bridge replaced there. We're evaluating the entrance bridge as well. We know there's some undermining and things like that that will need fixed. I need to take a look and see if that's actually sitting in the stormwater plan.
I would just ask to look to that as being a future park entrance. It's we see weekends such high use in the Willows. I just think we need another safe parking area, and I think that bridge is going to be part of it, that entrance. So I think it should be on our radar, that parking lot, the lower parking lot. It's big, can accommodate a lot of people.
The one right off of Darby Paoli Road, just so we're on the same page.
Yes, on Darby Paoli Road, the one at, you currently drive down the hill. It's not the greatest entrance for safety, but Sawmill Park is not ideal with parking. It's just, it's its own concern. I think we need a safer parking lot, 10 or Skunk Hollow. And there's also the area when you're turning the corner on the Sawmill, it's used somewhat as a parking lot. I'm not clear if it's a parking lot or not, but there's definitely.
It's not a formal parking lot, but one of the things that I added into my report this month, I just had a meeting actually yesterday with Delaware County and Delaware County's engineering firm that has been engaged. The Sawmill Bridge on Sawmill Road is going to be replaced. Right now, it's on a pace for 2027 as a project, given the current schedule that it's on. There's a lot of pieces, of course, with regards to design that are at play. So we had an initial meeting. We talked about the bridge. It's going to turn into a 2-lane bridge. So there's obviously concern with regards to that bridge. Right now, it's only one car can pass over. So we are
pedestrian capable.
So we met yesterday. We discussed it. There will be a bike lane, and there will also be a sidewalk that will also be added to that. And we're also working to overlay the Darby Paoli Trail Plan so that we know that whatever we're constructing there with regards to the sidewalk is also going to tie into our trail system, because as you know, that sits between two big parks. So
it's tricky. It changes the aesthetic with a bigger code bridge there. So hopefully
yes.
It won't be visually impactful.
It won't exceed 28 feet in width. So there's 2 9-foot cartways, and then the rest will be comprised of the bike lane as well as sidewalk. So as we get closer to refining the design, I certainly will be able to share it with you. But I think then would be the time is to consider parking. So I know you referenced the parking off of Darby Paoli Road. So that'll be used for staging and phasing. Everything's going to be set with crane equipment. So, but all on the horizon. People do use that parking lot now. I do see cars that are parked there now. But you don't have a way now to get over the creek if you park there. So all future considerations. But I'll definitely keep the board posted on how that project's moving forward. That's a long, it's a long process. 2027 seems like it's a long time off. I hope it doesn't get here fast. So those were a few updates. And then also, I just wanted to kind of dive in just quickly on Fenimore Woods. I am in review of the stable rehabilitation bid package. Just as the updated schedule on that, it looks like we're probably looking at February at this point where that'll be out to bid. And then, we'll be looking at all the remaining pieces of the project and how they hopefully slot into place as a result. I'm just using this as a visual. And this just kind of shows some of the remaining pieces that we have. But I know when we last met, the update was just that we were still waiting on the bid package from Seiler Jury. We're finally in receipt of that and going through that detail. We're working internally on all of our pieces to the project, so it does continue to move. If you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those, but project still remains underway. I mean, I would suggest any major steps that come before the Board of Commissioners, I will let you guys know, because then that's where the public input will continue. Now, if the stable comes in under bid, we're gonna keep, or, within bid in the budget that we had allocated, we're gonna keep moving forward with updates. If that ends up going over bid and we need to reconsider a different direction, that's gonna generate a lot more conversation, not only probably with the Parks and Recreation Board, but with the commissioners as well. So I don't know if there's any questions on that. Otherwise, just I want to quickly jump to Odoricio Park. So I have had the opportunity to start working through the draft concept plan. So we had engaged Greenhouse Design as our contracted design firm. They did sit down with me around Thanksgiving, and we did look at a preliminary draft. The draft does require some revisions that need to be incorporated. Unfortunately, it's just not an exact science with our consultants, so even though we meet extensively and we talk about what we want to see, ultimately, sometimes what we see within the draft is just not ready for prime time. So that is generating some refinement. I'm hoping we can get a plan we feel comfortable with that's incorporating a lot of the survey data that we've received and input from the community. As you know, we've been working on this for a few years now, meeting with members of the community. We had a bunch of meetings at the Radnor Township Civic Association where we engaged folks through several planning meetings, so a lot of their suggestions are being incorporated. Residents along Atlee, I know, have some stormwater runoff concerns within the park. We're trying to incorporate some of that as well. Only if we could maintain, of course, a rain garden, but there are some areas down on that side of the park that, if you look down here, we mow this area currently. This all gets mowed with our tractors. So I do want to evaluate a plan to potentially plant trees, restore those areas to meadow. We're going to be meeting with these residents in the new year, again, just to kind of have that conversation and come up with a plan. Again, that may not necessarily be rain gardens per se, but would be an opportunity to sort of forest this area and mitigate some of the runoff that's coming from the hillside here, as well as in this area, and also provide some more reforestation to the park. I know that's one of our goals just across a lot of the parks, and looking at areas where we can continue to plant trees in cooperation, of course, with the Shade Tree Committee and their efforts. So as far as a timeline, I would like to attempt that February, March, we can have a public meeting, potentially at the RTCA, to take a look at the preliminary plan, generate some feedback, and then continue moving through discussion and trying to refine the plan, and then hopefully be able to get an estimation of what the construction costs might be once we get to a plan that we all are happy with. And then understand what the order of magnitude for the cost of the renovations might be. tie that in, hopefully with next year's budget process, which for us usually begins around July and August, September, and maybe get an idea if there's an appetite from the board in some way to fund the project.
Is the February, March timeframe, is that just based on completion of the concept planning, or is that just, you want to give us leeway in terms of agenda items?
I would say I want to put that on the agenda.
I would say if we could put it on February sooner rather than later, unless
It's all predicated on what I receive from the contractor, from the designer, that
Okay.
I feel happy with bringing to the public.
Okay.
Quick question.
They take their own spin on it. It drives me crazy. I'm just gonna be candid. There's things that didn't end up in there that I wanted to see in there, we wanted to see in there, i.e. band shell, and then things ended up in there like larger batting cage area that we didn't want in there. So it's, sometimes they just take on their own personal spin and splash.
Okay.
What about the statue of Howard that we proposed to put up?
That was in there.
Quick question. Any more discussion about that upper parking lot there? Or where someone had inquired about some trees being planted in the parking lot near the basketball court?
You mean up in this area?
Yeah. Remember I called and asked, I think I had sent you a text and someone had told me that there was a plan to do something with some new trees and take away some parking spaces up there or something?
I'm not aware of any parking spaces being removed because of trees. I know that there were some extra trees that the Shade Tree Committee had from the right-of-way tree planting that they did in the fall, that they were looking to populate in and around Odoricio. And I know one of the residents whose husband is on the Shade Tree Committee was concerned about trees being planted while we're working on a plan.
Right, okay, okay.
And so that didn't happen, none of them happened, but I don't know if there were trees they were trying to plant in this area or more in this area, but we took those trees to a different park. So they were planted, they just weren't planted at Odoricio. And that's where, like, not to get too far down the rabbit hole, I know it's late, and, you know, I know that eventually what I would like to see is a tree planting strategic plan across our parks. So keeping in communication with Rick Foster, who is our Public Works Director, but is also the liaison to the Shade Tree Committee, as well as the Shade Tree Committee members, but having like a priority plan in terms of where we would like to see trees. So again, I mentioned like this area and this area they become candidates for trees, if that's a goal with this plan that we want to do. I know at the Willows, you have the area where our campfire is. There's a whole hillside that's wide open there. That's a great area to forest. We can move the campfire. I mean, we can move it to the area where the second picnic grove is across the bridge, where we actually have the camp out. Maybe it would actually work better if it was over there. Personally, I think so. But
Less to mow is better.
and
Yeah.
in that area where the hillside is now, it's mowed. I mean, it could become a forest. It could become a no-mow zone. Definitely. So, I'd like to see like each of the parks have bubbles of where these things have opportunities to be. That way, I know we get a lot of trees and we want to plant them everywhere.
Wherever, but
But
you
I
need a
would
tree
love to see a
planting
plan.
plan.
So internally, we are working with our GIS coordinator to develop by park a tree inventory so that all the trees are inventory. So our arborist, I know, has been working on that. I know the Shade Tree Committee has been very interested in doing that. And then that way, you know, when trees are removed, we have it documented, and then when trees are replanted, we have a documentation, almost like a dashboard. But then taking it a step further, identifying actual locations in our parks, that's strategically thinking, you know, and taking into consideration future plans, future improvements, so we know where there's great locations to plant a lot of trees, and then prioritize what that looks like.
Yeah.
it'll be in progress. But I figured we'd start out small with a couple of parks and just kind of work from there. My next update really, with regards to the items that I had listed there, really is just Radnor Activity Center. So I've been working with a firm, as you all are aware, to evaluate comprehensive improvements to the building. The building has a significant amount of work that's needed, and especially exterior failures with regards to the roof, significant brick repointing and masonry repointing, HVAC replacement. There's 10 pages of a 11 by 17 spreadsheet of line items that we have put together with our consultants. So long story short, we are working on refining the estimation of probable costs on all of our needs, safety, codes, ADA, wants, wishes, desires, everything from soup to nuts. My goal and my request to township managers is to sit down with the Board of Commissioners in the new year and get some direction on how we want to move forward. We have a lease with Radnor School District on the facility that obliges us to maintain the building. So I know there's some things that we have to do and we need to do, but we have to get some guidance on our future and where we're moving with the facility. So that's definitely a big project that's going to move very quickly in the new year. So I will probably meet with them in one of the executive sessions in January and get some direction, and I can update the board accordingly on how we're moving on that. So unless you have any questions, I mean, that really just concludes my updates. I don't really have any new updates with regards to any of the trail projects. I updated on the comprehensive plan, and then the last item I know we have on the agenda is the steward program. I would just continue to encourage board members to go out into the parks. If we need to refine the assignment of all the parks, especially as we get, closer to the nicer months, let's do that. And, recognizing that we still proceed without funding for capital projects, I think it just elevates the need to really take close looks at things while we're out there, as we try to do as much as we can, of course, internally.
Yeah, when I called you last week about the tree that fell across the trail, that was handled quickly. I was impressed. I was like, Tammy is the woman, so.
It's not me. I will pass it along to Public Works and the Parks
Whoever
Department.
you touched, it happened. I know that. And it seemed like a matter of minutes.
They tell me I'm high maintenance, so.
Not that I was on the trail past dark, but
My
it
last-
was it disappeared
With a dog without
real
a leash
quick.
or something like that?
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying, Howard?
exactly. But thank you, Tammy, for that.
You're welcome.
My last note to you, Tammy, is there is a citizen that wanted to take a walk in Skunk Hollow this weekend at 10:30, if anyone's interested. We're meeting in the upper parking lot for those that wanted to do a walkthrough in Skunk Hollow, point out any issues or concerns. I know I look after that park, so if anybody wants to come to that walk, 10:30, Sunday morning.
Oh, Sunday morning, okay. You make a motion?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Second? Third? Anybody else? Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good evening.
Did you guys hear, Patrick Henry was actually misquoted. He said, you didn't say, give me liberty, give